Hello and welcome. I'm Eric Schumacher Rasmussen. I'm the editor and VP of Streaming Media and the conference chair for this, the 7th Streaming Media Connect, our 7th virtual event. Hard to believe we've done that many, but it's been a couple of years, hasn't it? We're going to be back in person in Boston in May for Streaming Media East on May 24th and 25th. The website is up and running for that, so you can register anytime. We're going to have the program online tomorrow, so you can check that out. We'll also be having the Content Delivery Summit on Monday, May 23rd, as well as our Streaming Media University workshops. But we've had a terrific week of virtual sessions, panels, discussions here, and we've got a few more to go today. Wrapping things up tomorrow with a workshop called The Best Streaming Gear and How to Use It. All of our sessions will be available on demand as well. And if you attended any in person, you should get an email letting you know when they go online. Thanks for being here. Just for being here, you are entered into you were entered into a drawing to win an Amazon gift card. We'll be announcing the winner at the end of the hour, and you'll get an email with more information if you've won next week. I'd also like to thank our sponsors for the week, Bird Dog and Harmonic, and we've got brief video messages from them now. And I would also like to thank the sponsor of this panel, and that is Conviva. And Jose from Conviva will be joining the panel in just a minute. A couple of housekeeping notes first, though. If you have questions for our panel, please enter them in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen, or rather than the chat, I should say. That just makes it easier for a moderator and I to keep track of them. We also do have live transcripts enabled. If you want to turn them off, you can click on live transcript at the bottom of your Zoom window and then click on disable transcript. So with that, I would like to welcome Nadine Krefetz from Reality Software. And in fact, everyone on the panel, please, cameras up, mics on. We're all here.
Perfect.
Let's roll, Nadine. I'll just pass it over to you. We got a lot to cover this hour.
Sure thing. Now, one of the things that I think came up to me was, we call this panel measuring what matters. And I think if you think about it existentially, if you don't measure it, how do you know it matters? Anyway, we won't go off on the tangent for philosophy. We will actually talk about some very specific things here. So let's start off. I'm going to go around the circle and ask people about what kind of measurement they do and what their line of business is. Since we have a really kind of diverse group here, I'm going to start first with Efe and have him kick us off.
Hi, everyone. I am Akbulut from BritBox. That's a really good question, because like what kind of measurements we are doing is changing every day. So measuring, that's the exciting part. I observed that the biggest changes happen after the pandemic. Like before COVID, the acquisition metrics were important. But after COVID, mainly retention metrics become more and more important these days.
Okay. All right. We'll get back to that in more detail.
Yes.
So let's go next to Kieran. Kieran, sorry. Tell us what you measure and what kind of organization you're with.
Yeah, so I'm with Vimeo, and we have a product called Vimeo OTT, which is intended to be an all-in-one solution to help folks that don't want to do a DIY or kind of assemble your own, who want everything kind of in one package. So for us, it's very important that we're able to provide a lot of basic statistics out of the box about the viewing behavior of your subscribers, and also the revenue. How much money are you making from these subscriptions? I think we're going to talk a lot more in detail on this panel about some of the leading indicators that help you get there, but I don't want to ruin the surprise. So I'll kind of leave it there to say, you know, at the end of the day, we want to make people make money using our software. And I think throughout this panel, we can talk more about how do we look at the detailed numbers that matter for that.
Cool. All right. And let's go to Ethan.
Hey everybody, Ethan Moore. I am leading the business insights team at Atmosphere. We're the world's leading TV for business. So we stream in locations, digital, place-based, out of home. And really what matters for us, we're kind of a different beast in the sense that we own the product and the hardware and we curate our own content. So just as Fa said, really what we were seeing we did really well during the pandemic and there was a surge of customers. And now what are some of the factors or leading indicators that could lead to a customer churning to make sure that they're happy with the product and, you know, so on there. Sorry about that. The other piece I think is going to be venue measurement. So we need to know about foot traffic. And so then we're going to need to see how many people are coming into different venue classifications, such as a bar and restaurant will be very different than an oil change shop. So we're now breaking out our venue classes and then working with, you know, other measurement companies to be able to go to ad sellers to say, this is how many people you reach based on where you want to target our audience.
Okay. All right. Very cool. The next person is Igor, and Igor is a little bit of a different beast. I'll let you describe.
Sure. So I work for a company called Bitmovin. Many of you are probably familiar, and you know, we're a software tooling company for video streaming services, and you know, one of the tools we offer is analytics. And so, you know, I'll talk about it from the perspective of what we see our customers measuring and what's important for our customers. The biggest use case that our customers come with is measuring the technical operations aspect of running a video streaming service. So that's usually, you know, how is it performing for your audience? Things like the quality of experience measurements, really critical. That's where we focus really the majority of our energy. And we also help our customers measure audience engagement, right? So who's watching and what are they watching and when are they watching, to get some insights there to tailor content and also to target that content a little bit better to their audiences. And the last part is advertising effectiveness and performance, right? So for ad-supported services, obviously that's critical. So we help our customers answer questions about, you know, are my users watching my ads? How long are they watching? Are they getting through the entire ad, or are they dropping out? Are they coming back to my main content when the ad is done? And also click-through ratios, right? Those are really critical to drive engagement through advertising. So okay. We help with the tooling.
All right, now, and last but not least, Jose, who is with our sponsor today, and as well, Jose likely kind of interacts with Igor's company, but Jose, you actually have a really interesting product as well. Why don't you give us a kind of a little bit of an insight into what you do at Conviva and what products you have?
Sure. So I'm the director of product for Conviva Experience Insights, which includes the experience and precision for multi-CDN optimization. And it's a solution. It's basically an experience platform that is used by many streaming publishers to continuously measure and optimize viewer experience and engagement. Yeah.
Okay.
In a nutshell, that's it. And then there's several layers we can.
Okay, we'll go deeper. And you know, I think, you know, one of the things that I think about is that the data part of streaming is incredibly important, but it's also an area that can potentially be overlooked by some people, maybe not all people, and definitely no one on this panel. But you know, is this still an area where you're having to explain to your colleagues, your executive, your managers, et cetera, what it is that you're doing and why it's important? And I will jump to FA again, just because we had some really interesting conversations on the planning call about this.
Yeah, I mean, it is definitely a really exciting topic. Like, and I can talk about this all day, but like I'm gonna keep it short. Like I always say, like business without analytics is like walking in the dark while you are trying to arrive somewhere, right? Like analytics definitely gives you the signals to follow your new strategy insights and next steps. I mean, that's why at BritBox, we always shape our business decisions and with data and keep always analytics and business insights together. And also like, especially like in the streaming world today, there are so many metrics and measuring system to look. So I think, so I'm so sure like everyone agrees on this panel, like agrees on that, like measuring business performance is with analytics is a must. More like the conversation always around like what we need to look for the measurements. I'm totally agree, it's really important.
Okay, all right, so that's great to hear that it's actually a must. Do you guys agree with this? Does anybody still have, you know, a problem or, you know, the need to kind of continually explain this?
No, I think from my perspective, see, 8 years ago when I joined Conviva, it was a very different conversation. And it was still a bit of a QoS versus QoE conversation. Some companies were talking about becoming data-driven, but fast forwarding to today, I would just say every streaming business that is really making it, that the names we know, they are all heavily sophisticated data-driven businesses. And now it's really around operationalization and actionability and solving more problems faster. But the level of operationalization today, and that is also why the streaming industry is succeeding in a way, it's because of that.
So when you talk about operationalized, what does that mean? Like, does it mean, well, what does it mean? Well, I'll just leave this open-ended. You know, Ethan, can you describe, have you operationalized this? I mean, I know that this is kind of a recent position for you, but, you know, what have you done to kind of integrate this into how the business operates?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, you know, compared to some of the other traditional OTTs, that Jose is absolutely right. They're past them needing to explain the absolute lifeblood of data analytics that circulates through the rest of the business. We're more at an adolescent stage with hyper growth. So not only distribution sales is growing rapidly, our ad sales is growing rapidly, our content team is growing rapidly, our yield and optimization is, so every facet is growing pretty rapidly, and can't sit around a table and talk to each other. So I've now had to stop explaining why I report to the chief strategy officer instead of maybe the chief technical officer, because there's a lot of data silos, and we've taken the time to break that down. So we have a data lake that's, you know, can be the device streaming, it can be what they're streaming, where they're streaming, who sold it, what ads did we sell on it. So now that we have this, we're starting to build it up. But with that operationalizing piece, we will have maybe some fancier analytics to say, these are gaps because the inputs of what we're putting in aren't ready for scale. So then we could be talking to a Salesforce administrator on how deals are closed. It could be talking to how the hooks for data analysis on streaming content needs to be updated for us to pull in. So that's where I think of operationalizing. There's people, there's process, and there's tech. And we have the people, we're growing at a really massive rate. We've got the technology, and we're filling out that kind of middle ground of the process between those two. Okay.
Now, so you've got one particular focus in terms of, and you're fortunate in that you own the environment. Kieran, you're in a different environment in that you're within a larger organization. So I assume that you've had there's been a very specific focus, we'll say, but what is it that you're measuring, or what is it that you've had to kind of create so that you can actually do your job better?
Yeah, so one of the unique things about Vimeo's OTT offerings is that it's really accessible to all price points. In fact, we even have a free trial of this all-in-one platform. And the good news here is that out of the box, you're going to get tons of data, all these pre-configured reports. And there are things that I'm sure lots of folks in this call would already be able to talk about, like your net gain or loss of customers, churn, time watched, etc. But one of the problems that we have with this audience who's learning is that it's challenging to know what is the right data to look at. And that may change over time as the maturity of your business changes. So again, for Vimeo, a lot of our work is not just providing the data, but it's also trying to help people understand what data is useful. And this is actually my new job at Vimeo. I created a program called Vimeo Experts. And the whole intention here is to help video professionals start to understand the marketing and the data analytics that are underneath all of the streaming stuff that we get excited about. So again, like all the data is there, but it's really hard to figure out, what's the right thing at that right moment for such a diverse audience.
Okay. All right. No, that makes sense. Now, in terms of the I can't pronounce that.
Operationalizing.
Thank you all. Is it that you've created it and your vendors have helped you, or your vendors have guided you how to do this? I'm going to first kind of ask the vendor community on our panel. So Jose, why don't we go to you? Are you, when a company is looking at working with you, do you, how does it go? Is there kind of a best practices approach to this, or is it more of a custom development?
There's definitely a common baseline. It's streaming as a technology is streaming. So there is a common baseline. There are common use cases. If you release a new app version, how do you make sure it's performing as well or better than the previous and across every single device and device model and operating system? If you want to try a new CDN partner, how do you make sure it's good? And it performs in all the ISPs where you have audience and all the locations. How do you understand what your viewers need to do in the first 2 days that they've got a trial access in order for them to convert to paying subscribers? There's definitely well known that we've been doing this for a while, that we will definitely try to help our customers. Several of them are also very sophisticated and we also learn from them, obviously. It's a partnership. But then again, the keyword is really actionable. And then how can we get to a certain workflow, a certain API, to solve that specific use case faster? And bearing in mind that we are working in a hyper multi-dimensional space across thousands of devices, device models, ISPs, geos, etc. So how do you navigate this hypercube very quickly? How do you bubble up insights? So those are the kind of problems we solve, and it's definitely a partnership.
Okay, and Igor, the same kind of question for you, but realistically, when you're working with a new customer, what are some of the questions they have around this?
Sure. Yeah, we help, to Jose's point, everyone comes from a kind of a different place, right? And we try to meet them where they are. So some come to us as experts, right? They've used lots of analytics products. They understand what questions they want answered really well about their video streaming service. And in those cases, we help in a very direct way, right? You want this, here's how you get it. And then there are those that come to us where maybe they haven't really measured their service in depth, or they're launching a brand new service and this is a new experience for them. And so that's where we talk to best practices, right? Why do you want to measure audience engagement or ad engagement or quality of experience? What does it mean buffering? What does it mean startup time? Right? Those are kind of the basics. And so we help in the initial onboarding process with our new customers to explain all of those things and to point them in the direction where they want to go. Obviously, there's a plethora of data. They can measure a lot of things. They could tailor their integration in a way to measure specific aspects of the experience. So we try to guide them towards where they want to go, or where we think they want to go. Mm-hmm. And then once they're using the product, it's always easier to kind of see what you have and start to make sense of it, that's when it really starts to click, right? And you really start to understand. And so one of the things that we offer is effectively a baseline, your metrics for your service compared to all of our other customer services or similar services. Because a lot of the questions are about, well, is this, my buffering is at 1%, is that good or bad, right? Do I need to improve it? Probably, right? Is it, my number one priority, is my service going to be unsuccessful if I don't improve it? Probably not, right? So we help to kind of surface data from similar customers to give our customers an idea of, where are they relative to the kind of the average of their cohort of their community.
Okay.
So those are some ways that we try to help. So
it's interesting to hear what the two kind of vendor representatives said, because I want to, you guys have touched on things that I wouldn't have thought to ask you about, but I'm not obviously your customer, FA, or any of the other media guys on the panel here. So are there questions that you still get from your colleagues about certain things that you have to explain? And the reason I'm asking this question is because I then want to kind of find out whether or not there's an easy solution for it. So, if you think about kind of, somebody looks at some reporting that you have, what's the most common question you get back? I'll just leave it open and let one of you jump in here.
Oh, it is like, as I say, like the vendors bring so many things on the table, and it is always changing based on what's the business needs that time. Mm-hmm. I want to bring the topic back to this COVID time, because I can give an example, like national quarantine changed everything. Like streaming services in the market got a good amount of acquisition, but before that, mainly acquisition metrics was really important. And after the post-COVID era brought new business questions to the table around retention. And then with the vendors, we were trying to figure out all the retention metrics, like calculating the retention rates of paid subscribers and churn rates became more and more important to understand how long will these people stay with us, or are they gonna leave after a moment? Mm-hmm. So the question were mainly about that, because in today's streaming world, measuring how many new customers you get and you lost separately is not ideal. So you should combine everything. You should combine them. That's why, as an example, we come up with some new metrics to calculate the full circulation performance. And one of them, the metrics, we call it, as an example, outflow rate. It calculates what's the ratio of subscribers coming as the others are going. This is really important to make this mix, because today there's no streaming service in the planet having zero churn, and everyone is trying to fill their pool, but everyone has a crack on the bottom of their pool also. And the metrics I come up with, outflow rate, is calculating the ratio of overall cancellation on total converted acquisition. This is my suggestion. Currently, this kind of conversation is really common, how we can combine acquisition and retention together to create more 360 metrics, 360 analysis. Okay,
so I'm going to call it leakage rate. I like outflow, but leakage mm-hmm. is just something that I can use to just shock people with now. Yeah. Okay, so you have your leakage rate, and Kieran or Ethan, what are are you also asked about leakage, or are you asked about other specific things that you have to explain to your colleagues?
Yeah, I'm happy to take a first crack at that. I think one thing that's really helpful, in fact, we had discussed this as a panel in preparing for this, is that there are certain metrics that are kind of trailing indicators. They're things that happen after, and there are certain metrics that are leading indicators. And at different times in your business, there are different things to worry about. And I'll just give you a couple examples. For us, how much money you're making, so your monthly recurring revenue or subscribers, it's a really important number for our customers. Again, there's lots of different content creators that use Vimeo's OTT platform to run their business. And so at the end of the day, they want to make money. But what's interesting and exciting, and I think a lot of good topics on this panel, is what are the numbers that you can look at before that happens so that you can prevent losing money? And I'll just start just one or two examples, but I know other panelists have even cooler stuff to share. But even things just like how much time is the average person watching? You know, what sort of percentage of your library are they completing? There's all sorts of different ways to look at this, and it depends on your service, the size of your library, whether it's live or on demand. But again, that's, I think, a really fundamental concept for a lot of folks to consider is what are those performance numbers, like making money? And then what are things you can look at that are those leading indicators to tell you before something bad happens?
Okay. All right. Ethan, anything you want to kind of throw in before I head over?
No, I 100%. I mean, it's always, I love talking to smart people that are into this too, because sometimes we're always customer facing internally trying to explain things. And so for us, since I have to holistically look at how the business is going from startup to adolescence, it could be, into borrow a term that Jose recently had, I think was continuous and constant calculations. So we can have these, you know, what were once lagging indicators, but if we know that this is the lifetime value of an account that was cohorted from a month ago, we can update those levers on the back end or inputs that say, okay, this is the CAC or the cost of acquisition we need to have for somebody. But let's also look at like what's going to make somebody churn out. Is it the shipped, how many days it takes that we ship a device that they start streaming? Because they'll remember what it is, they plug it in the bar, they're excited, and they go. So we can start looking at the things that might have been like lagging indicators, but put those in a way that is fresh during this time, because everybody says, oh, during COVID, it's true, it's very fluid. Maybe we stop looking at streaming hours and we look at ad requests to the SSPs or from the DSPs. So then we can start putting those inputs in to actually have more leading indicators, because it kind of changes, you know, month over month. Like you don't want to be pivoting too much, but us remaining agile or understanding what that new goal line is, it has been, you know, extremely helpful.
Okay, it almost sounds like it would be, I guess, important to keep a lot of the data that you had been collecting, and then as you add new ones, which sounds like you're potentially creating a lot of different categories or different measurement tools, which I could see as being confusing, since we're talking about measuring what matters, not measuring everything. So
right, measuring what matters to the person I'm talking to, and then
okay, measuring what matters to the person you're talking to.
Marketing, sales, finance, executives, it's, you know, product.
Okay, I'm going to get to the questions in a second that are coming up, but I want to ask Igor and Jose about whether the things that the media guys have been talking about, do they have to create the information themselves, or are you providing easier tools for them to create this stuff? Because realistically, if they have a variety of needs, I'm kind of curious from your perspective, how are they able to get that information? Jose, I'll go to you first.
Sure. So I really relate. We were discussing indeed this. I really relate with what Kieran said. Some metrics are output metrics. If a user churns, they already churn. That's going to be very hard to get them back. What we do provide is, for example, segmentation. How do you understand your highly engaged viewers? How medium engaged, poorly engaged? If someone is only watching one series, they don't watch anything else, and it's the last episode of that series, that's a viewer that is at risk. So you need to understand these things as early as possible. If you have 1% rebuffering, from Igor's example, how do you benchmark that out of the box to make sure that this makes sense or not? And is it too high? Are user going to churn because of this? It's actually possible, because 1% is a minute in a football match, and a minute is 10 interruptions of 10 seconds. That's 10 interruptions of 6 seconds. That's a really long time. And so how do you understand what your threshold needs to be for someone to disengage? because so yes, this is a good part of this is solved. There are the tools to solve a good part of this out of the box, and the tools to understand and do more analysis on top.
Okay. Igor, same thing?
Yeah, I would add to that. So the way we typically advise our customers to think about analytics is think about what questions are important to you, right? What questions do you want answers to? Start there. And if the question is, the churn example we were talking about, maybe the question is, well, what types of, what is the profile of user that is at a higher risk for churn than another profile of user? If that's the kind of question, then you think about, okay, well, how would I go? What data would I need to answer that question? And maybe it's quality of experience data that you get from a Conviva or from a Bitmovin analytics product or some other, but you may need to connect that data with data that isn't available from a streaming analytics product. And I think that still is a challenge. There's not sort of an easy solution if you have to correlate data from multiple tools, because you might have tools, your kind of billing and operating support systems that give you information about your subscribers, and you can group them into different cohorts, but then you have to map that back to what experience did those subscribers have in your platform. And so a lot of times the off-the-shelf tools, you can't just get that, right? You can't just install a tool and say, okay, correlate this to all the other data I already have and give me an answer. I think that's that usually requires a level of engineering and development, which relies on having, API driven tools and platforms available to you. Ethan, you mentioned the data lake, right? That probably means you've implemented some, data aggregation system so that you can get things into different data elements from different sources into one place to make sense out of it. And fortunately or unfortunately, that's still a challenge for a lot of our customers. You can't get all answers from one tool.
Well, and we've started a sort of project in that way. And even though that there is a big data lake, do we have the fishing pole, to use the analogy for you to go further down it? But we have a list of what we think are going to be the factors that we would like to run through a regression model. But then we are gonna break out all of those elements and then put a level of effort and value on each one of those to say, okay, these are really important, but how long is it going to take to standardize, homogenize, group it together to run through the factor? If it's a really high value that we think, if they're playing just the same channel over and over, or they, have submitted this many tickets, customer service tickets, or they've, have this like buffering issue, like what are the things and how do we group it? And then can we go forward and then, do another regression later? So it's just because it's there doesn't also make it, that easy. So that's where I'm at the company here.
I have like 4 different questions in my mind at the same time, but before I hit the questions I have, does anybody else want to continue this conversation in terms of comments?
I think just to put some perspective on, there's 2 different things that we kind of are discussing both, but they are a bit different. I think a data lake solution where you combine multiple sources of data, you can put some processes on top to get to answer specific questions. That is one thing, and that is always valuable. And another thing is the need for this more real-time continuous measurement, because many use cases, you need an answer right then. And many times you actually don't know the question you need to ask, because you cannot guess that day there was a new operating system release and that your app version broke or that your CDN had an issue. So those are different things. And I think in an ideal world, it's kind of how it works, but there's an analytics, there are analytics workflows, and what now the Gartner term is augmented analytics on top of this, the automatic insights to get to specific conclusions, to understand all this data. But then there are also a bunch of APIs and data feeds to power specific use cases on ad hoc basis, as well as real-time ones, and to feed the data lakes and all of that. So I just want to make this distinction because there are these 2 applications.
Okay. Now, when you say there's two applications, so what is the typical data that someone thinks about that they have that they need to kind of gather and then gain insights from? I mean, we've talked about this a lot, but the thing is that, and I still want to stick with you, Jose, is, you know, we talked about churn earlier, for instance. You know, is that the thing that most people think about and they worry about, or is it more a quality of service thing? I mean, I know you hate the fact that I'm trying to pin you down on one thing, but what's the one thing?
It's both. It depends on the persona, depends on who you talk to, depends on what their job is. The head of streaming performance will care about how many sessions have zero buffering. When I joined Conviva, they cared about how many had below 2%. Things have changed. It's TV-like experience now. How many have zero? But someone else in the business will care about what do I need my viewers to do the first 2 days they subscribe to a trial to maximize the odds of them converting. Funny enough, a lot of the functionality that you need for both is pretty similar. Going a bit deep now, everything's a time series of metrics and metadata. And if you can navigate, like I mentioned before, this hypercube of understanding what people are consuming and putting even machine learning on top of that, that you can solve those problems. But the answer to your question, I think it's both. Depends on who you're talking to and what they're measured against. But to run a successful business, you need to assure great experience, you need to assure great content engagement, and to drive audience. These two things will drive audience.
You know, until you mentioned this, I hadn't really thought about the fact that you have, it sounds like a lot of different users using your systems. And do all of you have that, that you're dealing, you have, I guess the term many masters is kind of a strange term, but do you have a lot of different people who kind of interact with you and ask you things?
Yes.
Kieran shaking his head. Okay, all right.
From my end, and to kind of piggyback on what Jose said, absolutely. And I'm going to steal, if I can remember, a continuous time series of metrics and metadata. That's perfect. Once you just know that the velocity, volume, and variance is just that large, you've got to deal with it. So it's the lake, but then it's what I'm putting in my head is more like listening tools as well of, okay, on this hour, we usually saw last week this many streaming events or this many promotions have been played. And now we are down below a certain threshold of like 3% drop week over week. And with how many people in our hyper growth stage that are bringing to the top of the funnel, even though we do have a leaky bucket, everybody does, is, you know, it could be the yield and monetization person wants to get a text alert because in that hour, we're not starting to match up towards what we saw last week. And so then we can have product look, is this a problem with our devices doing client calls, or is this a problem with one of the ad servers that we work with? So then it won't be passing it around or so nobody's seeing it. So first they see it, and then they're going to know immediately, is it client side or is it affecting ad revenue because of something else? So definitely that's one thing, you know, product and yield would care about that. But then there's marketing and sales and finance, which is a whole other thing. And then there's the content team of they created a new channel. How well is this being adopted? So it's many masters. I can't think of a better term. So can very much.
Now, I was going to ask whether data is siloed, but we have somebody who asked a question that's kind of the flip side of this. And so the question was, are the structures of the companies reorganized so that the data can read correctly and turn into effective solutions? What do you think is the ideal company structure? So it is meaning, if I catch their meaning, that are you able to provide the information to the people who need it? And are you able to effectively kind of work through your organizations? And this is more for the media people. Or is there a different structure that you think in an ideal world would work better? Without putting you on the spot, and your bosses aren't listening to this. And does anyone have a comment?
I can make a comment based on observation in general. Okay, I'm
Sure.
not talking about my company or a customer or Netflix, just a general comment based on observation. I think that most companies that are heavily successful today are tech companies. And in the tech company, typically there's technology teams, which are composed of product managers, engineers, QE, DevOps, etc. And these teams themselves need to make connected decisions. They need one source of truth. So from product to engineering to operations, all of these will be typical users and they need a common source of truth. And then there will be marketing. If you run a social campaign, how do you make sure you can understand the conversion? Those will typically be a bit on the side, but that's very valid persona as well. And then there's customer care, which typically sits a bit outside. It's by viewer. Someone calls, reactive customer care. Someone calls in. How do you understand what they're seeing? And how do you understand all of them before they even ask? So that would be proactive customer care. Those are typically the personas, but one big part of this is really the technology organization and how companies are structured. If you look closely at companies whose names don't suggest tech company, but if you look close at who is actually building the service, they are tech companies.
Okay, so he's calling you media people tech companies. That's what the upshot of this is. Anyway, I'm not going to debate that. So, so what about silos and data silos? Is that still a big issue for people?
Not for me generally. I think the good thing is that even if there are silos and very specific tasks, say for marketing, it's very nuanced. There's tens of thousands of creative permutations to get a customer. And then there's, I agree with Jose that, the products and, content, I think need to be hand in hand because that is the coin, right? There's the distribution and then there's the monetization on each side of that coin, but the coin itself is the product and the content. Those things are king and queen. You can decide which is which. But understanding what the business model is, what are the KPIs or the OKRs that are driving each individual department by a business leader, I need to distill that down, find out what their source of truth may be, and put that into the lake itself. And so I don't have to convince anybody at the executive level that this is what we need to do. It's just now it's putting it into execution because we also can see where the operational gaps might be within certain departments and how we can put, more developers or change the content, et cetera. So it's a bit of both, I guess.
Okay. Anyone else experience a lot of silo problems?
Well, I'll share that one thing we saw during the pandemic was that performing arts, personal trainers, these sorts of categories that had to completely stop in-person stuff was very successful at transferring their business online through OTT platforms like Vimeo and other off-the-shelf stuff. What we see now with reopening is that they now work in a hybrid world. They've been able to validate that digital has enough of a revenue stream that they're going to continue to invest in it. But the reality is that those are almost always separate systems. So there's all sorts of physical, gym management systems and appointment management systems and billing. And almost always they are very separate from the streaming solutions. And then of course you have things like MailChimp or other, email or customer automation systems. So it is a problem. There is no magical solution because it depends on the type of business. Other broadcasters don't have to worry about event space management and bookings for your massage appointment, but some businesses do. And so I do think that's, the next level. If you're successful, then it becomes, how do you integrate this data in a way that's going to help drive your business?
Okay. Now, we have another question that came up, which is similar to one of the ones that I wanted to hit up. And my question was about normalizing your data, whether you have to do a lot of manipulation. Now, because there's a wide range of your businesses, you're in all sorts of different you have different needs. But do you have to do a lot of manipulation for the media guys here? Do you have to do a lot of manipulation of your data to get it to the point where you can use it effectively? Yes, no. Okay.
I think
I would say
this really
for, yeah,
it really
go ahead.
doesn't apply to BritBox. It's more like vendor question again. Like maybe my fellow panelists are much more apt to answer because like this is coming from again vendor side.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So you know, and the reason I was curious about whether there was a lot of information you had. Now I know Ethan has the closed model in that your data is kind of more under your control. But the question that came in from the audience was, how do you handle platforms with cross-platform tracking of individual viewers? So if this requires subscribing first, or I think Igor and I were talking about this yesterday, actually. Igor, do you want to kind of take a poke at this in terms of how do you handle
Sure.
cross-platform?
Yeah, there are a few approaches to doing this. I think what I see most commonly with our customers is an anonymized user tracking, meaning you're sort of tracking each user as a user. They get a number, but you don't associate them back to a name and address, right? All that personal information to kind of avoid the privacy, or to be compliant with privacy laws. But that's how it works. And so like in our product, for example, in our analytics product, we provide the ability for the video streaming service to populate that number, right? To associate that number with all of the events. And those events may take place on a web browser one day. They might take place on a iOS device the next day, and the smart TV the day after. And of course, you want to be able to look at that user behavior across those devices, in sum, or you want to break it up and look at it separately for smart TVs versus mobile devices, because the experience is expected to be different. So that's how typically our customers are doing it, by populating those sort of custom data elements. And the important thing from a tooling perspective is that you're using tools that allow you to do this. Of course, you can also populate private information if you wish, but then you have to worry about dealing with being compliant with all kinds of privacy regulations depending on where your service is operating.
Okay. All right. Let's see here. I have one last question, but before I get to my last question, are there questions that you would have of each other? And I asked you all to think about this, so I don't know if you do have questions for each other. But if you do, why don't we hear them? So let's see. Anybody here have a question for the other, or for others on the panel?
Maybe I can ask Jose. It's something we had talked about in the prep session, was some interesting numbers that you all have suggested for kind of looking at churn prevention. And I remember some sort of live stats stuff that was kind of cool.
Sorry, what was the...
I think you were talking about how you can use live concurrent streams, like how many concurrents as one mechanism of being able to do early churn detection. And it was a suggestion I remember from our earlier conversation.
I think we'll see if I know. So, okay, no, concurrent plays is one of the more important metrics to understand in real time, because you want to track your audience. If you launch a new episode of a series, you want to see how many people engage with it right then. It happens in our data set that there's a series going on and some episode is not as popular, and you can see that people actually drop during that episode a bit more. But for full churn, I think it's really comes down to a segmentation, more of a segmentation use case, understanding your segment of the highly engaged viewers. And how do you define that? Which depends business to business, of course. People that are watching multiple series and watch an occasional movie, for example. People that watch both live and VOD. So how do you define highly engaged viewers according to the business in question? That there's ability to do that. Medium engaged, poorly engaged, how do you move more from one bucket to the other? What do the highly engaged have in common? Can you get more to that segment? The trial is the same thing. How do we understand what people need to do the first 2 or 3 days they have the service in order to maximize the odds of them converting? So I do think that churn, there are real time, obviously, in real time, you need to understand how you're performing and all the changes that you make to the platform, a new app version, a new CDN, anything that happens, you need to track that in real time. In parallel, you need to track everything that you don't know. You need a way to understand if there's a specific cohort or audience segment that is being impacted with something. But then more on the churn, I think in the end, it's a bit of a segmentation use case as well.
Mm-hmm. And maybe I can also add a couple of things from the media side for churn. Like it's a really significant metrics. Like I think it's changing based on streaming service to service. Like for BritBox, like BritBox continue to have a really extremely low churn rate. We are really happy and proud of it. Like once audience subscribe, they stay. But again, continuously we manage the churn, and to manage the churn, like my team mostly uses viewership and engagement metrics to understand how to better like match our audience content needs to not to lose them, since at the end, like we are streaming service and people come to us for content, right? Like, so mainly if you are a streaming service, what I can suggest is like, you should think about viewership and engagement metrics when it's come to the churn. But I want to highlight something again, like when I say viewership data, I'm not talking about just looking at the top 10 and top 200 most watched show list. Now, of course, this is a great insight, but just looking at the most watched shows in not only what we do in the analytics and insights team kitchen, like because like tracking only the top shows user jump to watch when they sign up just shows why people come to your service. But like the churn is not directly related to why subscribers come. It is more like about why subscriber leaves, right? Like, so like for this, I suggest looking at your hidden gems as the second and third piece of content subscribers start watching after exploring all these top hits. I always give an example, like, I think everyone should start thinking like your streaming service like a store in a famous avenue. Like people walk in the avenue, there's people out there, and they may come to your service for the series they see in the storefront. But in addition to the big hits, when they come inside, they decide to stay if they keep discovering other content inside of the store in addition to the big hits, you know? And like, it's changing based on, again, like streaming service. Like in this situation, BritBox has a big advantage because we have the like largest streaming collection of British content in North America. I mean, if you like true crime, like British drama and mystery, like there are so many great pieces of content discovered inside, like in addition to the just like the storefront.
Okay, I like that analogy. I have one question for you guys before we wrap, and what metric matters? So what matters? Can we pick one thing each? And I know this is hard because you're going to all say it depends. But Ethan, okay, one.
I'll go with one that's probably more within our network and user base. And for us, and I know you said what matters, and I'll just say measurement. But what that means is audience measurement, since we have a one-to-many. So I need to start triangulating and geofencing all of our venues to find out what the foot traffic is, and to find out what that is, because that's going to be a very compelling story for TV for business, because we can say it's not one ad to 2, it's one ad to 8, it's one ad to 12, it's one, you know, and then I have to break it out by venue classification. So I'll go with that one, and
okay.
hopefully I didn't
audience
take
measurement. Okay.
Audience
Igor,
measurement.
Igor, how about you? You got to pick one too.
I'll go for ad view rate. So if you're an ad supported service, your ad view rate, which really tells you, you know, on average across your user base, how much of the ads are your users watching, right? Okay. I think that also is a good maybe leading or lagging indicator of engagement with content. If they're watching a lot of ads, okay. They're probably really, really happy about the content they're watching as well.
All right. Kieran?
Yeah, for subscription services like what Vimeo OTT provides the ability to launch, I like looking at a lagging indicator of monthly recurring revenue or annual recurring revenue. And again, that's kind of the North Star for making money. And then using that as a technique to work backward to say, what are the leading indicators that might change that in the future? But I think making money is a good one.
Okay, we're doing good here. FA?
I think like definitely like loyal fans, you know, when people come, how long they stay, what's their tenure. And so under the roof of, again, like retention.
Okay, attention. Jose, you're the last, but you're not the least. So give us wrap it up for us and tell us what's the one.
I'll try to give you a data-driven answer in this one.
Okay,
I do like the revenue, and I do like the what Kieran and Hefe said, but they are a little bit on the output metric side. How do we preempt that? So I'm responsible for an quality of experience product, but I'm going to give an answer against myself. I'm going to say, for real-time and trending history, and I'll tell you why it's a data-driven answer. It's peak concurrent plays, tracking them in real time, and it's in our product. People can there's a out-of-the-box dashboard, and they can configure what metrics to show up there. There are custom metrics. There's many metrics, and the metrics have a thing called persistence per user. A user, and we have many thousands of users. The one metric that is common to all the single users is peak concurrent plays. And that's because even to understand experience, you need to understand what audience has that experience. If you want to understand if you're growing, doesn't matter if it's live or VOD. You want to understand the trends in peak concurrent plays if it's growing. So if I have to choose one, which is a very hard thing, by the way, because each metric has different purpose, but I will choose peak concurrent plays.
Okay, and you guys have to forgive me for making you choose one. But so what we've got is peak concurrent plays, audience measurements, ad view rates, monthly recurring revenue, and fan loyalty in terms of duration and engagement. Perfect. You guys, we have to wrap it up. I want to thank you all for joining us. And this was a really interesting look into what matters. Eric.
That was terrific. Thanks everyone for joining. Thanks Nadine for moderating so well, as you always do. Thanks to our audience for joining us. The winner of the Amazon gift card is Melanie Starling. Melanie, watch your email next week for more information about that. And I'd also like to thank Conviva for sponsoring this panel, and Bird Dog and Harmonic for sponsoring the whole week. We'll be back in about 30 minutes when we talk about cloud versus on-prem versus hybrid workflows. So long until then.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.